ready? Energized for the last push? Or you're all fried from last night? So, first of all, it's good to be here at Agile Brazil. Just to give you a little bit about my biases, I'll give you just a quick background because I think it helps you understand as I'm talking how that influences my thinking and some of the things I'm saying. So I'm Joe Yoder. I come from the refactory. I was fortunate enough to be with the group in the early 90s that actually coined the term in the late 80s and early 90s and did the first work with the software architect group at the University of Illinois. And we were looking at good designs. I worked with Professor Ralph Johnson, the Gang of Four guy, doing patterns. And I actually was doing extreme programming, small talk, and functional programming. In fact, had some functional programming stuff. We had a DSL that wrote C++, or C, because we didn't do objects from that. And then I started doing a lot of small talk. And then I even had a team of developers. So I had started my own company, and I've been running for about the last 20 years in the late 90s. And even at a state government, we were doing extreme programming in TDD in the late 90s, where we removed the cubicles, and we were pair programming and doing things like that. But you need to know that at that time, I had a lot of biases towards technologies or processes. But at this stage in my life, I'm technology agnostic, and I'm process agnostic. I'm a real big believer in doing whatever adds value and not one size fits all. You know, I've been part of some attempts with some startups. I'm involved with the pattern community since the get-go and was doing Agile stuff before they even had the Agile manifesto or before Jeff Sutherland was doing Scrum. So I'm not trying to promote Scrum, but anyway, that lets you know some of my mindset and biases that influences me today with the words I'm about to say. Just gives you a brief overview of how I think. Oh, and obviously, I like to dance a lot too. And there you see me, that was in San Diego with Mary Lynn Mans. But you know, dancing is fun. It's a good thing to do. This is me in Scrum Rio. So since I value dancing, you know, so I'm hoping, and this is me and Roberta practicing our Agile team building skills. Roberta, who's here today, actually we were doing this, you know, as we were at Scrum Rio, and she's actually at Paxaguru, who I've worked with a lot as well. They have a lot of good teams there. As you can see, Roberta makes me a very good dancer and makes me look good. So thank you, Roberta. So that's probably the best part of my talk right there. And so if you give Roberta greens when you leave, even if you don't like what I have to say, okay? So just to give you a little bit of an overview of, I'm going to try to do a guided tour of Scrum Patterns, whatever that is. A book has just come out with a lot of these Scrum Patterns, but first I'm going to talk about patterns, how patterns are very useful. They've been around a long time, even if you really take it back, even before software, but how patterns are a good way of sharing proven practices and good knowledge sharing. And then I'll talk about why Scrum Patterns and how they can help and kind of give you a brief overview of the patterns. A guided tour. There's 90-some patterns. There's no way I can do that in this amount of time. But I'm going to do the best I can and hopefully, you know, energize you a little bit and keep you awake as we're going with that. So let me start off with patterns. So patterns, in fact, with this, I love this beehive analogy here because in a sense, when you look at what's going on with the bees, here you have a lot of shared collective knowledge of a hive working together to kind of build this pattern, and there's a lot of this shared things going on. And even in the early days when we were looking at patterns, that's what we were really trying to do. Let's do a better job. Originally in the software, when the Gang of Four came out, and I was working there and reviewing that, we were promoting is, let's help each other do a better job of sharing knowledge. A lot of people don't realize it, but a lot of the Agilists, the people signing the Agile manifesto, if you look at Alistair Coburn, who'll be here later today, Kent Beck, you know, Martin Fowler, just a lot of Jeff Sutherland, a lot of those, Mike Beadle, a lot of those people that were part of that evolved from that same community, that patterns community. We were trying to let's do a better job in the 90s of sharing knowledge in software. And some of the patterns started more technical, but then we started getting things like the fearless change patterns from Linda Rising and Mary Lynn Mans. We had organizational patterns. Some of the first Scrum patterns were in 1998, believe it or not, at one of the conferences. And we were highly influenced by Christopher Alexander, and he was focused really, he put out this book called A Pattern Language, which is a pretty cool book to get, but it was really focused around patterns with 253 patterns. That's a lot. But it was really to try to help even non-experts design your own house or whatever. So I want to build my living room and I want light on two sides, or I want a window place, or how do I welcome people into the entryway, and things like that. And you don't use necessarily all the 253 patterns. You take a subset, and with my type of problem, how do you solve this? I even think of, for example, a lot of my good Unix gurus, back in the days, and I know Unix pretty well, but the people that are really masters of it, I go to them with a problem, and they instantly have this toolbox of stuff they can whip out. Given this type of problem, you use pipes and filters here, sed, grep, and awk, and these different types of things, whatever those words mean that I just said, right? And if you're a Unix person, you know what some of those words mean at that point. And then really, for me, patterns are really proven practices for repeating type of design things that come up over and over again, and which help, in a sense, from what my perspective of and what I saw, was definitely highly influenced some of the meme set of what was going on. What we were trying to do is, let's do a better job and share this knowledge. And so Christopher Alexander, this is a quote out of his book about what a pattern is. He talks about the elements of a language, and I'll just read it very quickly. Each pattern describes a problem which occurs over and over again in our environment, and then describes the core of the solution to that problem in such a way that you can use the solution 1,000,000 times over without ever doing it the same way twice. You're like, huh? What do you mean you wouldn't do it the same way twice? So in other words, if you look at many, many beehives, they're all very similar, and they follow some similar patterns, but every one is unique too. So if you build your house, and I build my house, how I might have my window area or my window seating place, and how you have your window seating place, is they'll have window seating places, and they'll have entries, but we get to customize it and make it unique to the way that we're adding life to our house. And at the time, he was trying to add life to cities and houses, and we even invited him to give a keynote talk at one of our early object-oriented conferences back in the late 90s, and he challenged a lot of us, and that's when some of the Agile mindset was starting to take off, was let's put more life into what we're doing. Not only how teams work, but also put life into our systems and stuff. And in fact, we succeeded more with patterns than he ever did. And so when I look at patterns, obviously when we have with Agile is kind of more, when I think of the Agile mindset, more this tacit knowledge, it's more of once we get in there and we have the mindset, it's not like we're blindly doing something. We've gotten to the fact that we're evolving and we're doing what adds value the best. Patterns are like a lot of these best practices that we can document and share and use to kind of help bring people into what these best practices is. Just like if you're a basketball player, you show some of the cool techniques, how to shoot the three, how to fake somebody and back up. Well, I'm from the U.S., so I don't know soccer quite as well, or football, right? And but you start learning some, but even though you can kind of teach and share that knowledge, you ultimately have to get into the skills of doing it and repeating it over and over again. And so clearly, software patterns even dated back before. If you look at Kent Beck and Ward Cunningham over there, is back even in the 80s, they were talking about patterns. And then obviously the design patterns from the Gang of Four in the early 90s took off. But today, this is from Michael Mahafai, who's doing a lot with Ward Cunningham right now, who was the inventor of the wiki. The first wiki was done for collaborating with writing patterns. And then you have the Wikipedia. But here, he talks about how he's doing still a lot of research about how to uplift society and communities and using patterns for that. And they're successfully used for even building creative collaborative groups, communities, things within the Agile. So patterns have been around for quite some time, and if you want more information, I have to put a plug in because I'm involved with this not-for-profit, the Hillside Group. So I do a lot of volunteer work, but you can go and find much about patterns at thehillside.net. But it's something that patterns it definitely is a good way of sharing knowledge, capturing knowledge, and I've known a lot of companies that even documented patterns of stuff that they were doing inside their organization and use it as a knowledge sharing tool within that organization. So that's what patterns are, okay? Just to kind of give you the brief, quick overview. Well, then you might say, why do we need Scrum patterns? Everybody knows Scrum, right? Scrum's been around a long time. What are, we have the, we have the basic Scrum book, the Scrum guide, right? Jeff Sutherland, has documented the Bible, the Scrum book. How you can maybe do twice as much work as half the time and all this by doing Scrum. Hey, we just have these 1 to 3 week sprints. We'll have these daily stand-ups. We have a roadmap, and then we'll have a product owner with a backlog, and we get these tasks and prioritize them, and we go through these, these inspect and adapt, but these time box things. It's very time box. But the problem that happens a lot of times is with Scrum, and remember something I said at the beginning. I'm both technology agnostic, and I'm also process agnostic. So I'm not trying to sell you Scrum, okay? I don't care what practice you use. I like using mob programming a lot. Or, we got Woody here, or whatever. You could even do that while you're doing Scrum, by the way. There's nothing, whatever practice you're using, you can do that. But one of the problems with Scrum is sometimes people have this misconception about Scrum that's, Scrum is just for those that are beginning to learn Agile. You can't really be good at Agile mindset because it's good to get started because it's like training wheels. And so it'll help hold you up for a while. But, if you really want to get good at Agile, you need to move beyond Scrum. Scrum is just kind of a beginner stuff. And that's kind of a misconception people have out there. So it's like, if you're doing Scrum, we're way beyond that. We're Kanban, Lean, whatever type. There's also another problem with Scrum. There's this misconception. People think that it's kind of mysterious, so they learn Scrum by the book. Well, first of all, you have to go have some kind of certification and pay way too much money for a weekend course to become a master. Wow, I'm a master. Most masters I know, like black belt masters or whatever, they take years to get that. I remember meeting the first time I met a Scrum master. He had a weekend course and paid like $1,000, and he had a lot of misconceptions about Scrum and the whole thing. Anybody can become a Scrum master, right? And I'm not trying to bash this certification program. I'm just saying being a master, I looked at like Mike Beadle or Jeff Sutherland or people like that as being masters of the thing. But a lot of people, when they learn it, so they learn some of these practices. They learn how to do. This is how we do our daily stand-up. And it's almost like they have blinders on. And which is a good way to learn it first. I always say learn by the book. When I learned extreme programming back in the 90s, and with Kent Beck and stuff, it was like, always write your test first. And then we always had the user story and go through things. That's where TDD even evolved from, was extreme programming. And so it was good to learn it by the book, but ultimately I had to take the blinders off and incorporate it and adapt it to what makes it good for me. I always look at it like the shoe ha-re. The shoe is first just, I'm just learning it the way it is, but I have to ultimately internalize it and maybe even move beyond it from that perspective. So there's a mystery. A lot of times I remember one moment I worked in Silicon Valley, and I had a team of developers. This is in the last decade, the mid-2000s to the later 2000s. We were all remote working and remote pair programming and stuff. I was in the Midwest. They were in Silicon Valley. We completely replaced our systems and did things within, a half a year to a year that it took them many years that they failed doing. And so then we were working on this knowledge sharing, and then I was teaching them some of this Agile mindset and Scrum, and she said, and Mary, and I like Mary a lot, because first of all, she was a domain expert, and Mary was just very good, and she knew how to she would challenge stuff at times. She says, Joe, these stand-ups seem useless, wasteful. We stand every day and we repeat ourselves. Well, Mary, you can change it. It's okay. You don't have to do the same thing over and over again. If doing the stand-up and you're repeating yourself, maybe you skip some stand-ups. Or maybe you decide to mix it up. Let's go over to the Kanban board and play around with different backlog, and let's just change the way we do it. If it's a waste of time, you try to remove the waste. So maybe let's pull it away for a few days and see what was valuable in the stand-up or how we can adapt it. And so that's where sometimes people get stuck. Oh, we can't be doing Scrum unless we're doing this. That was never what the intent of any Agile mindset was. It's not blindly just there's one truth and this is the only way to go. So that was one of the goals behind the Scrum book. And so the Scrum book actually is out now. It's been published, and I'm actually, somehow my name is on there as one of the co-authors, but you know, obviously Jeff's name sells better, so he's right there at the top, which rightfully so. But you can actually get this, but it's got a lot of good patterns and a lot of good knowledge about how you organize how you focus on your organization and how you keep your value stream correct and how you keep focused on providing what adds the most value. So Jeff really should have said twice the value in half the time rather than going twice as fast, because sometimes the most valuable thing I can do is nothing. If I do anything, I'm hurting the value. But sometimes we don't believe that. I have to always be busy and show that I'm doing something. But that's not what it's about. So the Scrum book was really, it evolved for quite a few years. I mean, we started in 2010. We were a lot of different places. And it was really evolving as let's try to catch the best practices. So even if, as you're learning Scrum, you don't need a certification, but let's document the best practices. Like I like the way learning a bike this way has been proven much better. Take off the pedals, because the hardest part of a bicycle is learning how to balance it. So maybe you put a helmet on. She's missing a helmet. She probably should have a helmet, right? So, you know, but either way, you put out there and you learn more from doing the balance rather than it's holding me up, so I don't really learn how to do the balance. And they've done a lot of research to show that young kids learn biking much faster without the training wheels, right? And so really that's what a lot is about. So I want to go through, this is supposed to be the Scrum Patterns, a guided tour, right? So I want to go over these patterns. If you actually look at the book, there's 94 patterns, 2 pattern languages, and there's even a lot of sequences within there. And there's no way that anybody would ever need to use all 94 of these at one time. Really what it is depending on where your organization's at, you pick a subset and an order of the sequences you go through on how to do that. Now, can I make it through all of these before the time's up? Let's see, how much time do I have? Probably not. So what I'm going to do is try to give you a very high-level feel of what the patterns are, show you how you can read them. Don't tell anybody, but you can find a lot of them freely online. I'll have a reference later for that, okay? Or if you want to buy the book. So I'll show you how to use it and how you can get value out of the book with this, okay? Beleza? Ready to go? Are we ready? So, because I want to go at a pretty good steam, but I don't want to go too fast, because I want to get through as many of these as I can, because I always have skippable sections if I have to. But let me take a little bit of time for the very first pattern. The very first pattern in the book is the spirit of the game. You know, and really, when you're looking at spirit of the game, so I'll show you how it's written. It's usually got some kind of picture to kind of help you envision what the pattern's about. This is something Christopher Alexander would do in his pattern language books for building buildings and architectures. He might have a picture of light on 2 sides or a window space or, you know, an entryway. So that way you could kind of envision what the pattern's about. And it might have a little metaphor, but then it usually starts off with the name, obviously, that's important. And then we'll get into the context on the spirit of the game, saying what the pattern is about, when should you think about and consider the spirit of the game. And then it focuses on the problem. And really here at the beginning you have to even have a good environment to have Agile within your organization. And then as it evolves, you get into some discussion. We call this in the patterns community, forces. What makes the problem hard? You know, you can even think, for example, of if we're trying to build a real-time embedded system that works on an app, we only have so much memory, but we want it to perform good enough, so we have these trade-offs, you know. And so what makes things hard with the spirit? Because how we have to adapt our organization. On one hand, it's easier to just not do anything, but it's not helping us be successful and grow our organization. So how can we evolve these? What's the tension that makes this problem hard? And then ultimately, we talk about, we're trying to create a culture within our organization. So that's part of the spirit of the game. The solution is create this culture to people know and how to follow the spirit of Scrum in this example, or spirit of Agile, however you want to think about it. From that is how to create, when you're doing that, create this nice environment where people feel empowered and are welcome to do that. I know some work at a couple organizations here in Brazil I've been part of, both PagSeguro and Nubank, for example, I've done in the past. They both have worked hard on trying to make that environment where people are feeling empowered and welcome to experiment and try these different types of things. And then, of course, there's a lot of discussion that it follows up with, and where do you end up with after applying this pattern? Okay? And so when you go through the pattern, if you read it out of the book, a lot of them are pretty short, within a few pages, a couple pages, and you can kind of skip around and use it even as a catalog, figuring out, once you figure out the core essence. We even have patlets. Patlets are like just brief descriptions of the patterns as we go. So first we have the product organization pattern language. That has 37 patterns and 2 sequences to build your team and associations of people and organize things properly. And so there's a pattern map. It's got a whole bunch of patterns up there. You have patterns that start, as you're even starting with either a mist or a mess or whatever, and how to build the fertile soil and how to build the environment, possibly how to split teams up as you're evolving your teams, as you're growing, and a lot of things about the organization. So let's go in and delve into a few of these patterns based upon one of these sequences. And I'll explain sequences later, whatever that means. But it's really kind of an ordering through the patterns for solving different types of problems. And I will plant this little seed in your head for later when I talk more about sequences, is the most power you get with these patterns is we provide some sequences, but in your organizations, depending on what type of problems you have, you build your own custom sequence to solve your own set of problems. I've worked with some organizations, even here with Brazil, presenting these, and we work with some teams as let's brainstorm some sequences that they can go through to solve their specific problems. So with this one, you start off with the spirit of the game. You have to build the community of trust. We trust people, we're empowering people, and we want to ultimately, as we build these different communities of trust, is we need to make sure we have the right groundwork. So we want to have commitment, focus, openness, and respect. We want to have we want people to have courage, transparency. We want to build a fertile soil where people feel like they can do the right thing, and they can do team building and kind of even have the self-organizing type teams. So that's the first pattern, is we have to even build the environment so that people can do that. Now, a lot of organizations have already done this, so of course then you wouldn't be applying this pattern. And then of course it's good to know about Conway's Law. This has been around for a long time, but basically depending upon the communication structure of your organization, that's going to influence how your systems are evolving. So recognizing that, and if you think about how the types of products and things you want to do you have a flat organization, or is it like the Apple type one, or are we more like Google's type of structure? Because that's going to influence what happens with that. So organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs based upon those organizations. So if we always have to have a database team, and we always have to have a front-end team, and we always have to have a back-end team, that's going to structure how the software is developed. Whereas if we all of a sudden decided these lightweight teams, and now you can be full stack, cross-functional teams, and maybe you're doing microservices type, where the team is developing a lot of small teams that can develop and release differently, then that's a different structured type of organization, and we'll end up with quite a different set of products. Okay, legal? Most people's heard of the Conway's Law, so, but it's important. Even though a lot of people know it, they forget about it or they forget to apply it when we're thinking about how we're evolving our organization. And then of course, as you're building teams, you might want to have, you can even think of birds of a feather. So you think of guilds if you're thinking of the Spotify model or things along that lines, where we can create some ways of maybe we need to share security across a lot of teams. And so maybe we'd have some team members and we have some birds of the feather for sharing knowledge and things like that. And of course, it's important to involve the managers, right? So managers are supposed to be there to kind of support the teams. They shouldn't be interrupting. They should be almost sometimes be the roadblocks, helping get the teams the support they need. But it's important that the managers at your Agile teams, because development teams should be autonomous teams, self-organized with product owners, and you have different stakeholders. So managers, they have to make sure that act from a position of power to initiate and take responsibility for help changing the organization and help supporting the team with the types of changes they have that. So if the team has different issues, they should be able to use the support of management to work together to be able to do that. Now, obviously, with any organization, you need some kind of product owner, and so, some kind of product manager. This is an example of Henry Ford. He made sure that the assembly line went right as things were going. You can think of Steve Jobs or whatever. Somebody has to be the visionary or make sure things get built and move along with the right priorities as you're going through. And if we have we're developing for a lot of other organizations, there needs to be this partnership. But this partnership should not be a partnership with, we have a contract, and you said this, and I said that, so now we have to stick to it. It should be that we're trying to work together, and I know you said you needed this before, but now your business has changed. I should be able to adapt, inspect and adapt, and evolve with you as your business changes to do that. Okay? So this partnership is more collaborative development, and I have skin in the game now. There's risk sharing. We're sharing the risk and other things with this. Now, I had to throw this pattern up because it's one of my favorites. Swarming. One-piece continuous flow. It's one of our patterns as well. And obviously, if you're working with too many things at one time, you can radically reduce individual effectiveness. And sometimes there's some tasks that are slowing things time. So focus maximum team effort on one item at the same time. Well, this sounds similar to something probably you heard on the first day, right? Mob programming, exactly. So this is, like what Woody there was talking about. But there's all kinds of variations of swarming as well. I know that when Woody was writing his first experience report in 2014, I believe it was, and it was for the big Agile conference in the U.S., when I found out, I was like, I must shepherd this paper. So I convinced Rebecca Wurzbrock, who was the chair. I said, let me have Woody's paper. She says, well, if you do, I'll give you Woody's if you shepherd another one as well. I said, okay, I'll pay the price. Whatever the prices be, I'm going to do that. And I didn't even know Woody. I'd never met Woody. I just, because I came from, you heard where I came from, that sharing of knowledge, that patterns, uplifting, extreme programming, pairing, and all that stuff. But this just sounded cool, so I had to at least read it and find out. And I learned a lot from help. Shepherding is really working with the author, trying to be a set of ears and eyes for the paper before it gets final published. It's what we've used in the patterns community for a long time. It's what real professional authors do all the time. And so we have writers' workshops in our patterns conference back from the 90s from Dick Gabriel from that, who is a poet. But that's what they do in poetry all the time. So we try to do the same thing. So that's something that we brought to the Agile community with the experience reports, is we wanted to uplift and make sure that, so my job was not to provide advice to Woody, but to read and learn from Woody and try to help Woody get his message across so I could be the empathetic reader, and is he getting what he wanted? And one thing that I remember asking Woody early on with this paper is I said, Woody, this all sounds cool, but what's your main message? Should I be doing mobbing? I want to make sure that your paper is doing that. And he said, well, no, I'm not trying, it's cool. You might want to do mobbing, but I'm not trying to tell anybody to do mobbing. He said, my main message was I want people to constantly learn, constant improvement, inspect and adapt, and that's how we came across a lot of these ideas, retrospect continuously, and the continuous learning type aspect of that. And which I think came out real good in the paper. And so I became instant Skype friends with Woody because he was in San Diego and I'm in Illinois. And then so what ended up happening is a little bit later that year or the next year, I was in Poland and he was in Stockholm, and I had a friend in Stockholm. I said, hey, let's meet up. I want to meet you in person. And we went to Spotify and H&M. And even H&M was making some advantages of swarming one day a week for a half a day. So you can even do so, you can take advantage of some of this. So sometimes when you have individual tasks or impediments or things going on, you can have multiple people work together, swarm on the work item, and some impediment or whatever. I've seen examples here in Brazil, both at Nubank and PagSeguro. Nubank has a nice informal setup. You don't need a fancy environment to take advantage of swarming. Just to open up the environment, a few tables around where people can sit comfortably, 1 or 2 monitors, pretty good, and people can rotate around. And in fact, we wrote some swarming patterns last December at ScrumPLoP. SugarLoaf, that's the Patterns Conference, started at Rio de Janeiro. That's why it has the name SugarLoaf. The first one was in 2001. But originally, they were supposed to do a lot of Latin American countries. Actually, the last couple have been in Argentina and Chile. So last year was in Chile. And we wrote some swarming patterns. And so there's even some variations on this. And in fact, Daniel there, he's done a lot of mob programming and swarming, and he had a good experience report, so I convinced him that we should write some of these up as patterns. One of them is sometimes, even if you're mobbing full-time or swarming, there might be some impediment where you need to it's too much, it's a waste of time for the whole team to break out. So let's just have one person break out and then bring that back in and share with the team. Go take care of what that impediment or task so the team can keep focused. There's some kind of interruption. Another one is there could be some repetitive tasks that we have to apply all over the system. And so we can split the team up. Maybe you're pairing a bunch of people, then you bring it back together. And then this final one, which I like, is keep one in the dark. And that was really to help prevent groupthink. Pretty soon we're all thinking alike and we need to be challenged. So, okay, for this sprint, why don't you go join another team and we'll bring somebody else in. You come over, and so when you come over, you don't know what we're doing, so you're just like, why? Or what's this? Or wait, what about this idea? So then it gets us, then we have to either explain it, but it gets us challenging our ideas and maybe get new ideas. And the person that left, when they come back in a week or two or whenever it is, they come back with a fresh perspective and they see where we're at now and bring in new ideas as well. But anyway, these patterns are available online, but it just goes to show there's a lot of variation that you can do on this. And then there's a lot of other, you want to have ways of handling procedures, when you can interrupt, when you can't interrupt, proper ways of doing that. If you have a lot of teams, you have to coordinate between them, scrum of scrums. And obviously, retrospectives are important, right? And in fact, I think as Woody was sharing with mobbing, that team is retrospecting all the time. But if you have multiple teams, you still might need to do every week or 2 or month some regular retrospectives. The problem happens when retrospectives become bitch sessions. Sorry, did I say that? When it comes complaint sessions. So it shouldn't be about just complaining, or pointing fingers. It's your fault, or it's the DBA's fault, or it's management's fault. No, we should look at what we're doing and how can I improve? What are small steps? Linda Rising's a big pusher, and Norm Kurth, who wrote the book on retrospectives, talks about a bunch of baby steps. You shouldn't try to do too much, because then we don't know what improved and what didn't improve. So if you're doing during the mob teams, they're always taking a lot of baby steps and experimenting. But when you have many teams, that you might want to do some even bigger types of things. If you take on too much, you don't know what part of it failed and what didn't. So it's important. They say what happens in a retrospective, like Vegas, should stay in the retrospective. That way you feel safe and you can share whatever, right? But on the other hand, that's a two-edged sword, because sometimes what happens in a retrospective, no change happens. It just becomes every week or 2, let's just say the same things over, and that's a waste of time. That's when, so it's important retrospectives happen and they add values. And then ultimately we want to take product pride and team pride. Okay? So that's my quick. Hopefully you stayed with me a little bit. I gave you kind of a feel of the sequence as we're going through these patterns, starting out with building the right environment, focusing on, what kind of environment we have, even thinking about Conway's Law. How do we organize things, involve the managers? Obviously, we need to keep our prioritization straight. And then how do we do some of our planning and we can use swarming for certain issues and getting feedback as we go, okay? Beleza? Okay, good. So I think maybe I can sneak another sequence in real quick before we need to really move forward. How about a scaling sequence? This is a hot topic anymore in Agile. How do you scale Agile? Do you feel safe? How safe do you feel? Is less safe? Can you do more with less? Is less more? But so, in a sense, as you're going along and you're growing, and that's a good thing, when an organization is growing, it's because of success. So sometimes you have the problems of success. And so it's an important thing to think about and deal with. When a team's growing like this, which a few organizations I've worked with have had that problem, it's a good problem to have, but it can be very challenging. How do we share knowledge? How do we split up teams? And so, for example, you might even no longer have just a couple product owners. You may need a whole team of product owners. You may need a team of coaches. And how do you break up teams? So I want to talk about a couple of my favorite patterns because I like the way it sounds, mitosis. And it's just like the cell mitosis. It's kind of a cool idea. Is really, once your team, usually you have a team of about 7 plus or minus 2, right? They usually say is the magic number, 5 or maybe up to 10. But once you start getting over 10, the rituals, the communication, everything else starts becoming very cumbersome and hard to do a good job with. So how do we take a team that's grown, and it's organically grown, and for good reasons? Now we're hitting 12. Oh, can we still stay as a team? Maybe, but it's getting difficult. Oh, now we're up to 14. Wow, 20. Boy. So think about how we can split the team. So it's important to kind of take that bigger team and split it into a couple cross-functional teams. The challenge with this, and I was with one organization where we were thinking about this, and the natural inclination is, these 4 devs and designers are working more on the front end stuff. Let's move them to one team. And these other set of people are working on the back end stuff. Let's have them do another team. Well, now we have so you kind of lost it's supposed to be cross-functional. So you have to remember Conway's Law as we're doing this. So if we do that, then we have to think about that. And now we have to potentially have coordination. So I like this image of the synchronous swimming with the scrum of scrums, or even when you have a lot of teams, we need a way of kind of coordinating, especially cross-cutting type issues between these different teams. Okay? Legal? Okay. So, and then of course you might have a meta scrum. That's when management's getting too involved, and so we want to provide a time for them to look at things. You might have an organizational sprint pulse, and focus on values and your value streams, okay? Okay. So enough of the organization. I at least want to show you a couple of the value stream patterns before we finish, because the value stream, there's actually 56 patterns. A couple of them overlap because the different patterns can be in 2 different languages. And we have a couple sequences to really build relationships between steps of products, connecting what we have to do and make sure we're staying on value. Am I really providing the value, or we're building the right thing? Are we going the right direction? Do we need to stop and rethink and evolve that direction? And so if you look at the patterns, you're like, whoa, there's a lot of them up there, right? Say, okay, I know nobody can read that. Here, I'll blow it up a little bit for you, the top side. I mean, here you're looking at, let's take the vision. Let's make sure we're focusing on the value stream, whether we use set-based design for breaking things down. How do we break down to smaller, more manageable little pieces as we go through it? So there's a lot of patterns based upon that. How to coordinate with different teams possibly. When are we ready to start? When are we saying we're done? What's the definition of done? all kinds of things along that lines, okay? Many, many patterns, 50 some. And so, unless I just talk really fast, which I'm probably talking too fast for some people, but luckily they're translating, right? There's no way I could go through all these. In fact, even going through this value stream sequence is pretty large. So, and by the way, the numbers are just the numbers in the book of the patterns. So we did like Christopher Alexander, we gave a number so you can very quickly reference back. In fact, with the online web version, then you can click and then go right to that related pattern. Okay? But I will just say, for example, focusing on the value stream and how we're breaking things down to individual smaller and smaller slices, almost like what Alistair Koegberg has used recently as the Carpaccio type things, breaking things down to really small pieces, which is basically TDD with baby steps type things, and how to focus on greatest value first and how to prioritize that. And so I'll just mention at least the vision. You can think of Steve Jobs, for example, as the vision, is who embodies a passion for this product and really thinking and hoping and making sure that the product is kind of moving forward with where the organization is going. Sometimes that might be the product owner because they're responsible for that piece. That could be that there's their bigger vision, but there's a lot of sub-products as part of that, okay? Okay. So I don't have too much time to do all of the value stream patterns, so I'm not going to do any more than this one, just because I want to make sure to save some time to talk about things that are very important, such as sequences. You heard me mention sequences earlier, and this is where you get the real value out of a pattern language. By the way, this is a sequence described at one of our ScrumPLoP. PLOP stands for Pattern Languages of Programs, not programming, because your program could be an Agile program or whatever. We made that decision way back in the early 90s with this. And so we started meeting at least once a year originally we were in Sweden, and then we were in Denmark, and then we met in Portugal a lot of times in Douro Valley because everybody liked the wine that was there. But this was Jeff Sutherland's of the most successful teams doing Scrum, and this is actually a picture from one of that. And so I want to relate how pattern languages and sequences tie together. So pattern languages are all the possible set of things that you might want to consider. All the possibilities if you're building a house or a city, for example, with Christopher Alexander's 253. You know, in the product organization, this had 36, right, possible patterns. There was 50-some in the value stream. So a sequence is, given my problem, which way should I go through here? And so you remember the scaling sequence. Let's look at how the scaling sequence goes through. So first we have a Scrum team. Okay, there's where the pattern Scrum team is. I'll just kind of enumerate it for you. That's the 7th pattern in the book. Well, then the 12th pattern is product. Look, it's way over there to the left, a product owner team. And then, but things are getting big, so we might need to do some mitosis. Well, notice that pattern's way over there. And then from there, we're going to Scrum of Scrums, and then Meta Scrum. That's back up over there. And then ultimately, organizational sprint pulse, that's one of the value stream patterns, so it's not shown on this map. So you may even be using patterns from one of the other pattern languages, focusing on your value areas and your value stream fork. So a pattern language is a set of patterns, and they're related patterns, because if you do this pattern, you may want to think about these others, but it's not really an ordering of the patterns. Your sequence is saying, given my kind of problem, if I want to build a house with this type of living room and entryways and stuff like that, what are the sequence of the patterns that I should apply to build that house successfully? So when you really get good at the pattern languages, you think, what is the sequence, given your problem, that helps you go through and solve your problem from the subset of these patterns? So that's when you get the shu-ha-re, when you get the re side, is now you're making it your own. We put off a couple here that we found successful. For example, Jeff Sutherland, in product languages for highly effective teams, he really talks about maximize your probability of success by, first of all, having a stable team. If your team isn't stable and it's constantly jumping around doing things, it's going to be hard to do things. And look at yesterday's weather. We can learn from what's been happening. And so that can help us give a higher chance of success. We'll even estimate better. Then implement, make sure you keep things clean. Ooh, swarming, let's do some mobbing or whatever as we're going there. And hey, if we have to deal with interruptions and have emergency procedures if something goes wrong, or how we can stop this part of it and restart at any time. And then if we need to scrum the scrum, or ways of measuring happiness. And ooh, one of my favorite patterns at the end, those that finish early accelerate faster. And which is true, so that's where Slack is important. I mean, I've been writing a lot recently about Agile quality patterns, and I've also been delivering. Originally, I got it with a friend of mine, Diego Olivier from Paxaguru, who said, deliver fast with confidence. But then we realized the word fast was wrong. Deliver value with confidence. So then one of the main things is you need slack time to improve. So if you finish early, and if you haven't stressed yourself out too much, you have time to experiment or ensure you have certain qualities. And if something goes wrong, then you have a little bit of slack time to be able to focus on that. So being able to finish early gives you some time to maybe find an order or magnitude better way of doing even what we're doing with the experiments. In mob programming, they put slack time. I love this. Because when I said, Woody, mobbing sounds cool, but I don't really know it until I do it. And Woody said, well, come and join us for a day. Okay, so we figured out a creative way to get me to San Diego where he was at. And I went and joined his mob team. Didn't know anything about what they're doing. One day, it was awesome. Because when I showed up there, what happened was I instantly add value. And I was part of the team, and I was, the whole rotation, and I learned instantly a lot of what's going on. But the thing is sometimes I had issues that even though I didn't know a lot of their domain, what's going on, I still had stuff I could bring in and help them do some problems. I was even moving tasks on the Kanban board. But one thing that started off with the beginning of the day, we get to spend an hour learning about whatever we want to. The team, that's slack time. That's almost like Google's when they had that Friday, you could do whatever you want, right? That's where Gmail and a lot of other cool stuff came from. So just that little bit of time, it could be about something we're working on, or it could be some cool new thing we heard about, or just whatever. So having some of that was so important. So anyway, this is actually included in the book from Sutherland, okay? Look out. So I'm kind of giving you a quick overview of a lot of the patterns, and I want to make sure to save some slack time. And since nobody's given me a bad signal about timing yet that I've seen, I need to kind of look through, so let me just wrap up. So I covered a lot of the patterns. Here's the Scrum book. And there's some links. You can go to scrumbook.org or ScrumPLoP, or also you can available on PragPro or Amazon if you want to buy a digital or a printed version now as well. Hopefully I've left you that patterns plus anything, Scrum, whatever, I don't care, can equal success. Because it's trying to be agile, not blindly put the blinders on, like the horse, make sure they don't go off track. Ultimately, we want to get out there and be agile, do the best we can with that. So I wanted to at least have at least one kind of fun quote is, we make patterns, which is, and these are things that we're coming up with best practices and sharing them, but we share moments. This is by an author there. And so just to finish, see, I say be agile. I love Linda Rising, good friend from way back, the Patterns community, the Agile movement and all that. She wrote the Fearless Change Patterns with Mary Lynn Manns. And Linda, she always talks about the Agile mindset. And so remember, I don't care whether you do Scrum or not, or what. You could take advantage of these patterns regardless of what you're doing. Obviously, they were focused with the Scrum mindset, but there's very few patterns that are very Scrum specific that you can only do that. I'm not trying to sell whether you should do Scrum or whatever, or whether you should, there's no certification here. I'm not trying to do any certification and, buy my certification, let me sell you this. Really, if I'm selling anything, which I'm trying to give it away, we keep what we have by sharing unconditionally and giving it away, is do the Agile mindset, do what adds the most value. And so when you're doing Agile, there's like one truth, rules and procedures. Knowledge is intellectual, but when you're being Agile, it's based on principles and values. Knowledge is intuitive. intellectual. So mutuo rigardo. Hey, how can you fix something what you can't see? I definitely want to put a shout out to my good friend Adam Aguilar, who he helped at ScrumPLoP a lot, and he's a professor, but also had been involved with startups at the Federal University in Porto. And then Mariana, who helped me design a lot of these cool slides. They look awesome. She helped me look good. I hope you liked them from that. Not this Mariana, who I like a lot as well, too. She does good stuff, too. So, was that Chodabola? Valeo? Okay. So, thank you.